Welcome to our talk, the place where we agree to disagree, if we disagree at all. Today, my guest is Dr. Skembri Heitmann from Southern Germany. Our topic is Matrix. Hello, Claudia.
Hello, René.
How are you? You're in, I said Southern Germany. Where exactly are you?
I'm near the city of Kempten, which is between Munich and Lake Constance, for those who are aware of geography a bit.
Yeah, it's a small village, and the area, I wouldn't even know how to pronounce it in English. I'm sitting here in Greece still in my traditional house. As you can tell, I assume that by in the old days when the crockery was part of the dowry, that's when this display of the dowry was probably a tradition. This is not dowry, it's our daily dishes, but this is our traditional house in Greece, and that's why the plates are in the background.
I love it. It's beautiful.
Good. I'm glad you said that. I'd like to say a few words to my viewers about you, Claudia, introducing you. Please correct me if I'm wrong. You will have an opportunity. Claudia has a doctorate in integrative medicine. In 1989, she studied science of sports. In 93, she went to Malta. And from there on, she started to focus on a more holistic approach to life and to healing. This includes having become a Reiki master teacher in the 90s. And in 2004, she went back to Allgäu, where she is now. And she is teaching regularly various seminars. And in particularly, she is focusing on body talk. And I'm not going to say much more about you because I'd like to share the screen with you. And here we have actually your website. And dear viewers, you will have an opportunity to check up on the website in the description of the video and on our website. And here you see Claudia with the developer of source point theory, the developers, Bob Schrei and Donna Thompson. Here we see her with Dr. Ibrahim Karim, biogeometry, then CFT technique by Dr. Barry Gillespie, very famous now, James Oshman. And here we have equally as famous many YouTube videos with Bruce Lipton, epigenetics, a buzzword nowadays in holistic therapies, and my personal favorite, Amit Goswami. I think we may meet him again later on in our conversation, Claudia. So, dear viewers, this gives you an impression. And Claudia, I want to know, I'm curious, how is it to be around all these, well, leading experts in their particular field? I would be starstruck having all these names and being so close with them and working with them.
Well, how is it? I mean, you just realize they're all very normal human beings, but I have brilliant ideas and I think outside the box. And I think this is so important, you know, not to follow mainstream and whatever we call normal or conventional. And so obviously some of them I met more on a personal level because I attended their seminars and then you spend time together. Others I would just attend a lecture and spend some time with them. But to me, it has been all this, what you were mentioning, since I finished my first university degree, has been like a personal journey and meeting all these different people, connecting the dots, basically. Yeah.
Our topic is Matrix, and indeed, when I looked at some of the websites of the predominantly gentlemen, by the way, only one lady, there were buzzwords like blueprint, universal energy field, quantum information field, I presume this is all a little bit alike to The Field, as published by McTaggart, Lynn McTaggart. Yes, a number of years ago, many of us have looked at the book or read the book. Is that all the same as Matrix, as the topic we have today?
Well, there is some similarities, because everyone who is diving into a specific subject matter would use a specific vocabulary or terminology. And so when I was actually writing my dissertation, which also has connections to quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and quantum medicine, I obviously had to discover what is the difference or what's the common denominator between all these terms. So in a way, in a nutshell, you can say they're all very much referring to the same thing. Some of them more in the, let's call it, unmanifest world of potential, and some of them more in the world of the manifest, where we have the blueprint and the polarity and the interaction. And the matrix, in its simplicity, is a connecting field as well. Yes.
Good. I want to talk to you more about that. And of course, we have a common background insofar that our Reiki teachers were the very same people. And of course, Dr. John Feldheim developed later Body Talk also. And the idea of a energy field, which maybe today people might refer to as a matrix, was already part and parcel of our discussions then, back in the early 90s. Looking it up today a little bit on the internet, the definition of matrix, I found this, which I found very nice. And it is akin to what you just said. Matrix is something from which something else develops. But there seems to be a blueprint, there seems to be a plan, there seems to be a creative source within that energy field from whence then this something develops, isn't it?
It is. It's a very philosophical question you're asking here. Because the question is really, where is the source of us, right? Of life, of manifestation. So we tend to look outside. We tend to look into the macrocosm. But when we dive into quantum physics, we realize it's all within here. So whatever we are perceiving in the world out there depends on what's in here. So microcosm. And so the question is, where does the matrix start and where does it stop? And I want to mention another term of matrix, or another definition of matrix, because it obviously comes from the Latin word mater, or mother, and it also connects to the womb. So it comes back to that definition you just showed on the screen, from where everything kind of develops. And so to me, if I want to give you my definition of a matrix is a nurturing field. Okay, so our own body-mind complex, as we call it in our work, is a field. It's very physical, but it's connected to our emotions, our mental state, our spiritual state, and our connection to source. Now, on the other hand, that connection to source is related to the field that you mentioned earlier on, and to the quantum world of manifestation, or possibilities and potential, which then manifests as a wave, and from a wave, into particles, and into whatever we can embrace and see every day. So to me, the matrix is in everything. And if I may, I want to read you a quote, which I have changed the words around because I wanted to include matrix. The original quote actually contains the word systems. So you may have heard about dynamical systems theory, and all the systems are interacting. This quote is by a person who's actually a body worker, and his name is Jeff Maitland. So I'm going to read it in the terms of matrix. So every matrix is composed of matrices. Every matrix is a member of a matrix, and the forces between matrices are matrices. To understand any one matrix requires understanding the body, or the whole person, as a whole, and to understand the body as a whole requires understanding each matrix. No one part or matrix is more fundamental than any other. So to me, this summarizes in a way what we mean by holistic work as a healthcare practitioner. Because when I work with an individual person, I have to see the whole person, but on the other hand, they're going home to their family, which is another field. They're living in a society, which is another field. And they have their own history based on culture and religion, which is another field, and matrix.
Okay, I'm with you. I liked what you read out, although it's a little heady stuff. And what you said earlier, when you described the matrix as a womb, and instantly I had, and it's a somewhat politically incorrect joke, but I'm going to make it nonetheless, which I remembered, which will lead to a question I have. And the joke is this: many years ago, there was a graffiti which said, "God is black." And in a different handwriting underneath, it said, "Yes, she is." And because the womb and the femininity of what you described, even to the point, and I remember there also in the sentences, the matrices which are connected to matrices, driven by matrices, that sounds pretty chaotic to me, to my simple mind. So the point I'm driving at, and that's why I made the politically questionable joke about the graffiti, where's God in all this?
That's a strong question, because I mentioned earlier on, we're already going into philosophy here. God is the source of all that, but most people would refer to the source of it, to consciousness. Okay, so, and because it's a more neutral term, unfortunately, the word God or whatever, term others would use in other backgrounds and religions, pushes a lot of buttons and creates a lot of tension, right? And but the source of it all is God. Okay, and so we like to refer to this as consciousness, but obviously consciousness is another big term we need to kind of define. So
you would use the term God and consciousness pretty as synonyms for each other almost.
Yes, but obviously you have to define what is consciousness. So if I may use another quote, which is one is by Amit Goswami and another one would be by Ramesh Balsekar.
Don't. Let me show you something first.
Okay.
Because you gave me the right catchword to share my screen one more time. Okay. I hope this works smoothly now. And you were just about maybe to quote what I'm going to share now with you.
How can a system or an object be in two or more states at the same time?
It's very easy. Instead of thinking of things as things, we all have a habit of thinking that everything around us is already a thing, existing without my input, without my choice. You have to banish that kind of thinking. Instead, you really have to recognize that even the material world around us, the chairs, the tables, the rooms, the carpet, camera included, all of these are nothing but possible movements of consciousness. And I'm choosing moment to moment out of those movements to bring my actual experience into manifestation. This is the only radical thinking that you need to do. But it is so radical, it's so difficult, because our tendency is that the world is already out there, independent of my experience. It is not. Quantum physics has been so clear about it. Heisenberg himself, co-discoverer of quantum physics, said atoms are not things. They are only tendencies. So instead of thinking of things, you have to think of possibilities. They're all possibilities of consciousness.
You now?
Is that more or less what you wanted to?
More or less. Yes. Basically,
elaborate.
You he's saying consciousness is all there is, but because he talks a lot about the potential and the possibilities. So I like another quote by Ramesh Balsekar, who is was a very wise person. And basically he said there's consciousness at rest and there's consciousness in motion. So to me, this combines the two worlds of the unmanifest and the manifest. Okay, and the moment there's consciousness in motion, there is basically duality, manifestation, and something we can interact with and relate to with our five senses.
But you said it yourself. This is very philosophical. Of course, Goswami is referring to science, but really we're talking halfway religion here, aren't we?
Well, most scientists in the advanced sciences, especially quantum physics, are diving very much into philosophy and specific approaches to life and belief systems, which have controlled our way of thinking, especially in the last 200-300 years, which we call the Newtonian Cartesian age, because of the originators. The intention wasn't to create the world of fragmentation we see today, but this is what has happened, right? We're seeing the bits and pieces. But when we're talking holistic, or even when we talk matrix, we have to understand everything is interrelated, interconnected, and one item, thing, or thought has an effect on everything else that exists around us.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Two things. The beautiful simplicity of the Namaste, which freely translated is I am one with everything, and everything is one with me, and so are you. It's a free interpretation on my behalf, but this is like a spiritual expression of an experience people have in certain enlightened or very holy, in the sense of complete holy, moments of their life experience, when they truly get it, that we are all from the same source, that we are all interconnected, that there is actually no significant difference between Claudia and René in Germany or in Greece right now. Right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And the beautiful thing is, you mentioned Namaste, but in so many cultures, there is an expression, like I know from South Africa, there's Sawubona, there's Ubuntu, all of these terms express that deep understanding of that connectivity and understanding and the mirroring that's going on. So I always say, even though we look different, and we're all very unique expressions from the ocean of consciousness, as I call it, as waves or iceberg or whatever metaphor you want to use. But through that ocean of consciousness, we are all connected, and nurtured.
Yeah. Incidentally, I think that the Greek term for what you just described is agape, which freely translated and misleadingly somewhat is love. Mm-hmm. But it's maybe more appropriately translated with unconditional love. So we are coming into our discussion is having a scientific background, and we have gone into a religious, philosophical background, which I find is exciting and is very relevant for everyday's experience. So I want you to you mentioned earlier your client is going back to the family. What's the relevance of all this? What's the relevance of you and I talking about matrix and unconditional love and all kind? What's the relevance in daily life for you as a woman in your family or for your clients?
I mean, that's kind of the idea, that people learn about, I am not alone, I am not separate, I am constantly connected to source, to God, to consciousness. And so in my work, either when I'm teaching, when I'm talking, or even when I'm treating people, I'm not, I am trying, the idea is to help their system to reconnect to that awareness that I am a beautiful expression, a beautiful, unique expression of God, and I am not alone. And let's call it the physical location in our body would be the heart. So that fits back to what you just mentioned about love, unconditional love. And so if you look into other techniques and modalities that are around, that are becoming more and more well-known, even on people who are not interested, maybe directly, consciously at least, in consciousness. And what we're discussing here right now would be, what I know is HeartMath, so it's heart rate variability, connecting and improving and optimizing the coherence of the heart. But the heart as such, it's such a big topic to look into it, the physical heart, the heart chakra, but also the connection to source, to spirituality, and what it really resembles. And so coming back to the practical aspect, my wish, my desire would be to help my clients, my patients, my students, everyone, to live more heart-based, or we call it also heart-brain-based rather than head-brain-based, and come more from a connected feeling rather than I'm alone feeling, which especially in this day and age where everybody has to live in isolation, is not allowed to touch anyone, and whatever is not helping really our immune system and our self-healing and self-regulating ability, which again, is related to the matrix as well within our body-mind complex. Yeah.
I'm with you. Thank you very much. The other thing which I was wanting to bring up is epigenetics. And you used the terminology belief systems 2 times already, and it's one of my favorite catchphrases in my own seminars and teachings. And in epigenetics, of course, it is clearly evident that our belief systems are very powerfully have an influence on our consciousness, on our experience of life, and therefore of our health. Mm-hmm. Could you, epigenetics, belief systems, matrix, can you expand on those catchwords a little bit for me and maybe put them together from your perspective?
Okay, I'm going to borrow again of, there's a number of authors who've discussed and described this, but there is a model which is called the downward causation model in physics. But it's used in other fields as well. And one of the persons involved in describing this was also Amit Goswami. So in his book, The Quantum Doctor or The Quantum Activist and whatever, he talks about this a lot. So in simple terms, you can say there is this so-called bliss level. So that's the pure consciousness level. And then we have the first levels of manifestation, which is the spiritual level, the mental level, the emotional level, or the vital level, and then our physical level. And in modern science, it can actually be proven that, it kind of in this downward causation model, the higher frequency levels would affect the lower frequency levels. And so our body is the last one. So in other terms, coming back to your question, our belief systems, which means our mental attitudes, our inner expectations into life, which are based on our experiences, either inherited experiences or acquired experiences in fetal life or since we were born, basically create these inner expectations and programs, and they're more or less on the mental level. But obviously they also are linked to our emotional states, whether we're fearful, angry, all of that. And that can be mirrored then in our physical symptoms or physiological dysfunctions. Okay, so now coming back to epigenetics, it is very well known that some of the so-called epigenetic factors are inherited, but most of them are acquired. And they're acquired by our emotional state or imbalances or distress experiences. And every single experience I have every day could be immediately mirrored on that genetic / epigenetic level, which means has an effect on cellular function. But it's also affected by my biochemistry. So that means the food I eat, or even the thoughts I have, which affect the chemistry of my body, also has an effect. Obviously, the toxins I inhale, or these factors. And then the other factor, which leads us back to matrix, is the environment. So inside, it's my inner environment, which depends a lot on the substances circulating in my body, but we also have the matrix within the cells or between the cells, which has different words. It's called intercellular matrix, or intercellular space, or interstitial space, whatever, Pischinger space. And this is, but on this level, on the cellular membrane level, is where self-healing is happening. And it's very much the inner environment. And interesting enough, it's called ground substance or matrix. Okay, so, and that's linked also to a very specific level of hydration, which is called easy water or exclusion zone water, which is another topic. But this, whatever is happening in my outer environment, so in my fields, in my social field, my work environment, my family environment, and all of that, obviously is interacting all the time with the stories I have inside my systems, the expectations I have. So we cannot really separate one and the other. So it's all quite intensely interconnected. So when I'm trying to connect the dots, or even disentangle the dots, if there's too much emotional involvement, this is what we have to look at. So all of these different levels of how a human being is, how he or she functions, where they are coming from, and where's the starting point? So we have to check by priority.
It's this untangling of the complexity. When you spoke, I thought, well, some of this is like a vicious circle in epigenetics, belief systems influencing us, creating then the neediness for chocolate. It's like a vicious circle. So healing is actually, metaphorically speaking, an untangling of the complex crochet of life. There is an interesting art talk about this subject from an entirely spiritual point of view, and here we ending up at the same conclusion from a scientific or a pop scientific approach.
Yes, definitely. And it's a question of where is the starting point. Is the person really ready to go through changes? Because if I'm pushed out of my comfort zone, on one hand, I want to heal. Yes, I want to get better. And on the other hand, do I really want to change my habits? Like you were saying, and so who's in the driver's seat here? And this is what we have to look at. And I can observe that a lot of times people do get better, but then when they're back in certain fields like work environment or family environment, which are the closest fields, they're so influenced by that expectations into that field and from them to that field or their matrix that they easily, fall back into the old habit patterns.
Tell me, and we're getting towards the end of our art talk, but in my own experience, life experience, also as a therapist, as a person who is involved in the reconciliation process, and so on, I find myself confronted often with situations where I have to make almost an internal decision. Am I going to be the button pusher? Am I going to be the unpopular catalyst for the benefit of a breakthrough, of a healing, of a shift, of a quantum leap, possibly? Or am I transgressing into a field where I'm actually creating more pain, where I'm tearing up old wounds and that like? So do you understand where I'm coming from, and how do you deal with that? Are you in a similar dilemma sometimes?
Sometimes, but I in my, let's call it my previous life, before I dived into holistic work, I was working as a sports therapist or scientist, like you were mentioning. And my job was always to give homework to patients and tell them, don't do this and yes, do that, and change your nutrition, and, you know, all these different specific changes in life, which were easy steps, baby steps. You know, but it's very challenging when you involve the conscious mind and the conscious decision making to make these changes. And so I've learned to observe and say, no, I just observe, I take notes. And when the right moment is there, I would mention something, because I understand that the subconscious, you know, the bigger part of our makeup and field is the driving force. And this is where our stories are, and they need to be addressed. And so, for example, I have a lot of children in my clinic, and a lot of them come because they have attention deficit, and, you know, and if you tell this child, focus more, concentrate, they can't do it. They want to do it, but they can't do it. So I understand your question, but I've learned over the years not to force. But obviously, when there's the right moment, yes, you would push it, you know. So and then give them homework. Have them work through the ripple effects of that button pushing, but it has to be the right moment. And that's, I think, is the art of practicing, the art of mediating, the art of observing. So I've learned over the years, honestly, to hold back more, not hold back, it just doesn't feel right. And then I say, okay, it will happen.
Very wise words. That's the high art, to push a button or to just take note that the button exists.
Sorry to interrupt, but also I think it's the most important part is that you, as the teacher or as the practitioner, you have to create a field for yourself, from yourself as well. So which means you have to work on your own stories. So when clients or patients come to you, they're already in that field. So it's much easier for them, hopefully, to go through shifts and changes and address certain deeper underlying topics, which may be more challenging.
This is very good closing remarks, because I think in here is the message to every teacher, to every therapist, to every parent. So thank you very much for that. You know, I had my definition of matrix. Well, I stole it a little bit. It's a little bit of a copy, but it's an atmosphere of understanding and friendliness that is the matrix of reconciliation or of peace. So thank you very much for having been here with me. How was this experience? How do you feel? Or is there something you would like our viewers to still hear from you?
No, I think it was a beautiful round topic, and it came to a nice conclusion. And I think the most important is to understand that, you know, the more we live from our heart, which is the peace, the understanding, the reconciliation, and the nurturing field we all can create. Because the energy field of our heart, you know, is measurable. It's so much bigger than the energy field of this one here, right? So the more we can actually physically hug or energetically hug, and embrace and also accept and respect, not always say this is good or this is bad, you know, the extreme of polarity that's happening, you know, more acceptance and respect. That's the most important part, which will then nurture ourselves and our matrices. Yes.
This is the beauty about it. It's a classical win-win.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you very much, Claudia. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Renee.
I wish you a nice day. I say goodbye to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renee. Nice.
Bye-bye, Claudia. Dear viewers, thank you very much for having viewed. I hope you will subscribe to our channel or to our newsletter and watch the next episode in 3 weeks' time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.